Ethan arrived on the island in search of rest. He was tired, exhausted not only physically but emotionally. After years in the financial sector, he found himself trapped in an endless cycle of meetings, contracts, and responsibilities. The idea of taking a vacation on a secluded paradise seemed like the perfect solution to his weariness. He longed for a pause, a refuge where he could forget the world and its constant demands. The island appeared to be just that, far from the noise, far from the pressure. As he stepped off the helicopter, Ethan was struck by an overwhelming sense of peace. The sky was bright and clear. The ocean shimmered in vibrant shades of blue, and the lush greenery seemed to invite him to let go and simply breathe. It was exactly what he needed. Yet, the moment he set foot on the ground, he felt something different in the air. He was used to being welcomed with formality and grandeur, but here the reception was unexpectedly simple. No hotel manager in a tailored suit, no rehearsed politeness like he was accustomed to in luxury hotels. Instead, there was Anna. Anna was a resort employee, direct, unpretentious, without extravagance. She carried a genuine smile, offered him a warm welcome, and seemed entirely unconcerned with who he was or the fact that he was a wealthy man. What impressed Ethan most was her serenity, the calm confidence with which she carried herself, as though she were in control of her own life, something he had never truly experienced, despite all his success. Though he was accustomed to respect, titles, and formality, Ethan felt a subtle discomfort in being treated with such simplicity. It was as if she embodied everything he had yet to learn to value. Still, in some unexplainable way, he felt touched by her sincerity, as though she had silently offered him a lesson. With time, Ethan began to adjust to the island's atmosphere. Luxury still surrounded him, but the calmness and simplicity of the people began to reshape his perception. Instead of marble hallways and conference rooms, he found genuine smiles and relaxed conversations. Yet nothing was more transformative than his frequent encounters with Anna. She never seemed rushed nor burdened by the urgency of the world he came from. While Ethan constantly rehearsed his mental agenda, Anna took her time to listen, to smile, to help. Initially skeptical, Ethan began to see himself reflected in her tranquil demeanor. He noticed how she interacted with the staff, the guests, and her environment. She didn't need anything more than her presence to make an impact. One evening over dinner, Anna shared a memory from her childhood. It wasn't a story of wealth or privilege, but one of simplicity, of lessons learned through mistakes, of understanding that the most important things in life cannot be bought. She spoke of how her parents had taught her that true wealth was kindness, patience, and empathy toward others. Her words were simple, but their depth left Ethan shaken. He realized he had never truly encountered such genuine humility. When dinner ended, Ethan returned to his room, carrying a heaviness in his mind that he hadn't felt in years. For so long, he had chased more success, more recognition, more wealth, as though fulfillment could only be found in accumulation. But Anna, with her quiet strength and peace, was showing him another way, a path without urgency, without the need to compete or prove oneself, a path he had never dared to imagine. Ethan tried to brush aside his thoughts, but they lingered, haunting him. The next morning was beautiful, the sun shining, the ocean breeze light and fresh. But Ethan couldn't escape the weight of what Anna had shown him. As he walked through the resort gardens, he observed the other guests, some dressed in designer clothes, others carrying practiced smiles. Even from a distance, he could sense the superficiality of their interactions. Nobody seemed genuinely interested in anything beyond status, power, or what he could offer. The loneliness of that realization pressed heavily on him. Deep down, he knew that most of the relationships he had built were not real. They were founded not on who he was, but on what he had, his wealth, his influence, his image. What once seemed like the ultimate solution, money, now appeared to him as a dividing line, an invisible wall between himself and others. That awareness made him withdraw even further. Instead of mingling, he chose to spend the afternoon walking along the beach. The sound of the waves, the soft wind against his face, the endless horizon. Nature itself seemed to be calling him to release the weight of everything he had built. And then, he saw her again. Anna sat on the sand, alone, calm as ever, watching the sea with serene eyes. Her stillness was in stark contrast to his life of excess and pressure. She seemed to embody a peace he was desperately seeking. Drawn by something he couldn't yet name, Ethan walked over and sat beside her in silence. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need explanations. What he was beginning to understand in that moment was deeper than words. The value of simplicity, of stillness, and, above all, of humility. Ethan began his journey on the island believing he was in control of his life, armed with wealth and accomplishments. But through Anna's simplicity, he was challenged to look inward and question the true value of everything he had built. Money, fame, and power could never fill the emptiness he felt. What he was truly searching for was not something to be bought, but something to be built. Genuine connection, inner peace, and a life lived with purpose. If you also believe that the best things in life cannot be bought, like this video, share it with friends, and leave a comment below. Have you ever felt lost, like Ethan, even while having everything the world could offer? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow Ethan's journey as he begins to discover what truly matters. Anna woke before sunrise every morning. Her life was shaped by relentless work and the constant struggle to provide for her family. She had no luxury of long breaks, no carefree weekends. Yet every day she rose with determination, wearing the same quiet smile. Her swift, purposeful steps revealed a woman accustomed to challenges, someone who faced hardships without complaint. Her shifts at the resort began with cleaning rooms, preparing spaces for guests, and ensuring every detail was in place. There was no pause between tasks. The hours were long, the work exhausting, but Anna never lost her gentleness. Tireless and resilient, she worked with an effort most people would hardly comprehend. For her, this wasn't just about earning a living. It was about supporting her mother, her siblings, and holding on to the hope that one day her life would change. Even when work conditions were harsh, she stood firm. Ethan, watching Anna in her environment, couldn't help but notice the contrast between them. He, who lived in a world dictated by meetings, deals, and rigid schedules, struggled to imagine such a demanding routine. And yet there she was, working tirelessly, smiling sincerely, never hesitating or giving in to fatigue. For Anna, this daily effort was simply an expression of her dedication to her family, to life, and to her dreams. Anna's resilience lived in every gesture, in every smile she offered guests, in every task she performed with care. For her, exhaustion didn't exist, because love and responsibility carried her forward. Daily resilience builds inner strength, making life's difficulties more bearable. Ethan, no matter how hard he tried to disconnect from his business-driven mindset, couldn't stop analyzing everything around him. He was used to weighing, measuring, and judging through the lens of financial worth. But as he observed Anna, something within him began to shift. Surrounded his whole life by luxury and excess, he was now discovering something new, something Anna embodied. The quiet strength of small acts of kindness, generosity in its purest form. Anna, knowing little about Ethan beyond his name and presence at the resort, continued to act with genuine impartiality. When he sat down for lunch, she approached with the same smile, the same care, as she gave to every guest. To her, everyone was equal. One afternoon, Ethan appeared especially weary, lost in thought. Anna, noticing his expression, walked over and placed a cold drink before him, smiling gently without saying a word. It was only a small gesture. Yet for Ethan, it was like a window opening onto a world he had never truly known. She expected nothing in return. Her gesture was unpretentious, sincere, and in that quiet moment of connection, Ethan felt something stir within him. Ethan began to wonder how a single act of kindness, given with no expectation, could strike him so deeply. That silent exchange, without words, carried more meaning than any contract he had ever signed. Small acts of kindness often carry a deeper impact than grand gestures. Anna was not a wealthy woman. She owned little, but she had always known that true wealth lay in things money could never buy. Even in the darkest of times, she never lost hope. Her life was far from easy, yet she refused to let hardship take away her optimism. She understood that daily struggle was only a step and that someday things could change. Unlike Ethan, she didn't view time as an enemy. To Anna, every moment was an opportunity to move forward, to edge closer to the future she believed in. Ethan, observing her, was deeply moved by her ability to keep hope alive. He, who had lived under constant pressure to achieve more, to be more, realized he had never possessed what Anna carried so naturally. She didn't need riches or status to find meaning. She believed life was made of moments, of small steps taken daily, and that effort itself was its own kind of reward. Though Anna rarely spoke of her struggles, Ethan could sense the battles she had endured. She had lost her parents, fought to keep her family together, and yet never allowed despair to break her. Her faith and optimism were firmly rooted, unshaken even when everything seemed uncertain. She believed with all her heart that a better life was possible, and to Ethan, that hope was more inspiring than any success he had ever known. Anna's hope was not a fragile wish for change, but a deep conviction that no matter how hard the journey, she would always find the strength to continue. Her optimism was contagious, stirring something in Ethan he could not yet explain. Hope can be a guiding light in times of adversity, illuminating the way when all else feels lost. Ethan, surrounded by luxury and material comfort, realized that none of it could give him what Anna possessed: inner strength born from resilience, hope, and dedication. He began to see that the little things he had always ignored, her small gestures of kindness, her unwavering faith, were far more powerful than any contract or financial triumph. What truly mattered, he was beginning to understand, was not what a person owned, but what lived within them. If you too believe that real strength lies in simplicity and hope, give this video a like and share it with friends. Leave a comment telling us what keeps you hopeful during hard times. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following Ethan and Anna's journey, which still has much to reveal. As the days passed, Ethan began to feel more and more drawn to Anna. It wasn't just her kindness or her simplicity that touched him, but something deeper. He felt that his own perception of the world was being challenged in ways he had never imagined. Anna's confidence in her vulnerability, her dedication, her outlook on life. Everything seemed so different from the world he had always known. And yet Ethan couldn't deny the attraction he felt for her, something that made him feel insecure, as though he were trespassing into forbidden territory. He was accustomed to associating with people from his own world, those who shared his social class, his concerns, his achievements. But Anna didn't fit that mold. She was different. Her values, her life perspective, her simplicity, everything seemed to question the very idea Ethan had of who he should be with. He knew that their differences in social class were undeniable, and a doubt began to form inside him. What would she think of me, a millionaire surrounded by luxuries, now attracted to someone so far removed from that world? Ethan tried to justify the emotional distance he placed between them, telling himself that a woman like Anna could never be more than a resort employee. But as their conversations grew more frequent and deeper, he could no longer ignore what was blossoming inside him. The internal struggle became increasingly present. Ethan tried to convince himself that it was impossible to get close to Anna without there being an invisible barrier between them, a barrier he himself had created, based on prejudices he hadn't even known he still held. He realized then that the true struggle wasn't against Anna, or the circumstances that separated them. Ethan's internal struggle was against his own view of social class, a view he believed was unchangeable but was slowly being deconstructed by Anna's simple presence. Overcoming internal prejudices is essential for true connection with others. Anna never worried about hiding the hardships of her life. She knew her reality wasn't easy, but she also understood that concealing her truth wouldn't make her any happier. In her conversations with Ethan, she spoke openly about the daily struggles of providing for her family, her frustrations, and her hopes. She wasn't ashamed of who she was or of living with what she had, and that made her more real in Ethan's eyes. Ethan began to realize that, contrary to what he had always thought, Anna's vulnerability didn't make her weak. On the contrary, it revealed an incredible strength, a courage to be authentic, that fascinated him. He had never met someone so honest with themselves, so willing to show their weaknesses and dreams without fear of judgment. The way she spoke about her life, without embellishments or pretenses, touched something deep within Ethan. He began to wonder if he could ever be that genuine in his own life. Ethan, who had always surrounded himself with a facade of perfection and control, began to see that true strength lay in sincerity, in the willingness to show who you are without fear of seeming vulnerable. He felt touched, and at the same time, challenged by that pure truth emanating from Anna. Being authentic is a powerful way to create trust and intimacy. As Ethan and Anna continued to meet, their conversations became more natural, more profound. They began to share not only stories of their past, but also dreams for the future. Ethan spoke of his ambitions, the pressures of being a successful millionaire, but also his desire to find something more meaningful. Anna, in turn, spoke of her hope to improve the lives of her family, how the hard work she did every day was not just an obligation, but a way to build a better future for those she loved. The barriers that Ethan thought existed between them began to fade. He started to realize that, although they came from different worlds, the experiences they shared weren't as distant as he had imagined. He had focused so much on their differences in class, status, and money that he couldn't see what really mattered: the human experiences they were both living. Anna's insecurities, her simple dreams, her fears and hopes. Everything she shared with him seemed far more important than the superficial differences he had feared. Ethan began to understand that what truly unites people is not material possessions, but the experiences, feelings, and perspectives they share. When he listened to Anna speak of her dreams, he felt a genuine connection, something he had never experienced with anyone else. The social class, the wealth, the differences that once seemed so significant began to fade in the face of what truly mattered: human connection. Ethan now understood that social barriers are built by the lack of true communication, the lack of interest in what the other person truly feels. When he started seeing Anna not as an employee, but as a person, his own internal barriers began to crumble. Social barriers are often built by the lack of genuine communication. Dialogue can break them down. Ethan began to realize that while their differences in social class seemed like an insurmountable barrier, they weren't what truly mattered. What unites people is the shared vulnerability, the dreams and hopes, the common stories. By allowing himself to see Anna not as an employee but as a person with values, struggles, and desires, Ethan started to overcome his own insecurities and look beyond the surface. He learned that true connections aren't based on status or wealth, but on the shared humanity between people. If you've ever experienced something similar, if you've realized that what truly matters in a person goes beyond their possessions or status, give this video a like and share your experiences in the comments. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the continuation of Ethan and Anna's journey, which still has much to reveal. Ethan, despite growing closer to Anna and beginning to see her in a deeper light, still believed she was a simple woman, with no grand pretensions or complicated history. To him, Anna was someone who had made a modest life choice, someone who had distanced herself from luxury by choice, seeking simplicity and humility. However, one afternoon, everything changed. Anna, in a quiet yet intense conversation, revealed something Ethan had never imagined. With a serious look in her eyes, Anna told him that her life had not always been like this. She didn't come from a simple family, but from one of the wealthiest families in the region. She had grown up in a world of privilege, surrounded by excess and luxury. Yet, the pressure to follow her family's traditions and live up to their expectations led her to make a life-changing decision. Anna chose to distance herself from her family, leaving them behind to build her own life, away from comfort and the rules they wanted to impose on her. She opted to follow her own principles, to live simply, free from luxury, but with the certainty that this choice reflected her true essence. Ethan was silent. He didn't know what to say. This was an unexpected revelation. Anna, whom he had thought was a woman without a grand story, had a past that challenged everything he thought he knew about her. Now, he understood that her simple life was not the result of a lack of choices, but a decision of strength and independence. Something inside Ethan began to question everything. He didn't know whether to admire or feel confused by this new information. The woman he had started to fall for now seemed even further removed from his world. What seemed like a choice of necessity may, in fact, have been a decision of strength and independence," Anna continued, and her words were like a mirror reflecting her deepest struggles. She explained that, after distancing herself from her wealthy family, she had faced a harsh reality. It hadn't been easy. She had to learn to fend for herself, deal with loneliness, and endure the rejection of her own family. They never understood her choice. She was seen as rebellious, ungrateful, even selfish. For Anna, the years that followed were filled with constant suffering, but also with learning. Each difficulty she faced strengthened her, helping her understand the true value of hard work, dedication, and humility. Anna explained that, unlike many, she never saw suffering as an obstacle but as a lesson. Her life choice, as painful as it was, made her understand that true power didn't lie in inheriting wealth or living in the shadow of comfort. The power lay in being self-sufficient, in building her own life based on her choices and values. Ethan, who had always had everything he wanted and was born into a world where obstacles were easily overcome with money and status, couldn't fully comprehend the weight of what Anna had lived. But the way she spoke, with remarkable calm, made him realize that the suffering in Anna's past had not destroyed her. On the contrary, it had shaped the strong and determined woman she was today. Sometimes, the suffering of the past gives us the strength to move forward and make choices that reflect our true selves. Ethan, touched by Anna's sincerity and courage, felt profoundly transformed. He, who had always felt superior because of his wealth, began to understand that a person's circumstances don't define their worth. Anna's story, her courage in following her principles, her ability to face adversity without giving in, made Ethan rethink not only his view of her but also his perspective on the people around him and himself. He began to realize that Anna was not just a humble resort employee, but a woman with extraordinary inner strength, someone who had made difficult choices and continued to fight every day for her ideals. This revelation not only made Ethan admire Anna more than ever, but also led him to a deep reflection on his own choices and privileges. He questioned himself, what would I have done if I were in her place? Would I have had the same courage to change my life for a greater cause? Ethan felt a wave of respect for Anna that made him see her in a completely new light. The barriers he still held in his mind began to crumble, and he began to understand that, for Anna, true freedom lay in the choice she had made, not in the wealth she could have inherited. For Anna, sharing her story felt like a weight lifted off her shoulders, as though something she had held onto for so long was finally released. She no longer cared about others' judgments. For her, the truth had become a source of power. She knew her story could be seen as a difficult choice, but she was no longer afraid to reveal who she truly was. The truth set her free, and by sharing it with Ethan, she felt that her connection with him deepened even further. Accepting others' life stories is essential for building healthy, lasting relationships. Anna's past is a lesson in strength, courage, and self-sufficiency. She chose to live according to her principles, despite the hardships and family pressures. Ethan, upon discovering the truth about Anna, learns that a person's worth is not defined by the circumstances in which they were born, but by the choices they make throughout their life. He begins to respect Anna even more, not only for her humility, but for her courage to follow her own path, facing challenges head-on. If you, too, believe that the choices and courage of a person define their true worth, like the video, and share your reflections in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow Ethan and Anna's journey as they continue to discover and learn from one another. Ethan was caught in an emotional whirlwind. Although his connection with Anna had deepened in an unexpected way, he couldn't shake the growing fear that was consuming him. He felt, with unsettling clarity, that their differences in social class might prove to be an insurmountable obstacle. With every meeting, every word exchanged, Ethan saw in Anna a woman who, despite her struggles, touched him in a way that felt genuine. But deep down, he feared that this relationship, this love that was starting to grow, was doomed to fail. He wondered, how could a woman like Anna fit into my world? And how could I, with all my responsibilities and status, fit into hers? Ethan had lived an entire life surrounded by expectations, societal norms, and a rigid social structure. He knew that the acceptance of others, his family, his class, had always been tied to everything he had built. But Anna, with her humble background and completely different outlook on life, seemed to reflect everything he thought he could never allow for himself. The thought of losing Anna forever, of seeing their relationship crumble because of what he perceived as a chasm between them, paralyzed him. He felt that the class divide was an invisible wall, a line he could not cross, despite all the affection and connection they shared. This insecurity began to consume his thoughts, causing him to question not just his future with Anna, but also the person he had become in the process. The fear of failure can paralyze us, but facing it is the first step toward true happiness. Anna noticed that something was changing with Ethan. His posture, his attitude, everything seemed distant, more distant than she had ever felt before. It wasn't just a matter of attraction anymore. There was something in his eyes that made her sense a growing separation. It was on a quiet afternoon, while they walked along the beach, that Anna, with her silent wisdom, decided to confront him. She looked him in the eyes and said without hesitation, "You're pulling away from me, Ethan. I can see it. You're afraid, aren't you? Afraid of losing what you have, of losing what you thought you wanted. But what you don't realize is that by pulling away, you're already losing me." Ethan, caught off guard, tried to deny it, but he couldn't. Anna was right. She knew that his greatest fear wasn't just their class differences, but the possibility of being rejected, of not being accepted. She knew that throughout his life he had grown accustomed to perfection and control. But true courage, she believed, didn't come from the ability to control everything around you. True courage was about surrendering to the unknown, something that couldn't be controlled, like love. Anna challenged him to be braver, to act despite the fear, to fight for what he truly wanted. She wasn't asking him to change who he was, but to free himself from the shackles he had placed around his own heart. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. The conversation with Anna, although direct and difficult, was the turning point for Ethan. Her words echoed in his mind over the following days. She was right. He knew it. He had built an invisible barrier made of fears, insecurities, and prejudices that was preventing him from living what was unfolding between them. He had allowed himself to be consumed by the fear of losing something he wasn't even sure was real, not realizing that by failing to act, he was already letting go of what he wanted most. Ethan knew he couldn't keep living trapped in his own mind, surrounded by patterns he had created for himself. He knew that to be happy, he needed to break down the internal barriers that were holding him back, from embracing vulnerability, from fully living love. The life he knew, full of rules, appearances, and expectations, could no longer be enough. It was time to let go of that and confront what he truly felt. And so, Ethan made a decision. That evening, he went to Anna, not knowing exactly what he was going to say, but with an open heart. He looked at her with a different gaze, deeper, more honest. Ethan knew that if he wanted something real to happen between them, he needed to be true to both her and himself. Ethan had no more doubts. He approached Anna, not as the millionaire he had always been, but as the man who finally understood the true meaning of courage, to be vulnerable, and to live according to what his heart truly desired. Sometimes, the greatest barrier we face is the one we create in our own minds. Ethan learned that the greatest challenge in his journey wasn't the external differences he thought separated him from Anna, but the internal barriers he had created himself. His fear of losing Anna was, in fact, a reflection of his fear of exposing himself, of surrendering to what he couldn't control. By finally overcoming this fear and acting with courage, Ethan began to understand that true happiness doesn't come from maintaining control. It comes from allowing ourselves to live fully. If you've ever felt paralyzed by fear but managed to overcome your internal barriers, like this video and share in the comments how you found the courage to change your life. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow the next chapter of this transformative journey of love. Ethan had always lived under the watchful eye of his family and the elite that surrounded him. From a young age, he learned that status, power, and money were the pillars of life. But now, faced with his love for Anna, he was willing to challenge everything he had ever believed. For the first time, Ethan made a decision that would displease everyone in his social circle. He chose to live authentically, by the side of the woman who had awakened in him a new sense of life. The news hit his family like a bomb. Heated meetings, harsh words, veiled threats. His parents and siblings accused him of tarnishing the family name, of wasting the legacy they had spent decades building. To them, Ethan's choice wasn't just a betrayal, it was a disrespect to tradition. The financial and social support that had always been guaranteed was cut off. Invitations disappeared. The doors that once opened easily were now closing. But Ethan, despite the pain, felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time, he was not living to please anyone. He knew he would lose privileges, comfort, and power. But he understood that this was the only way to gain something much greater, the freedom to be who he truly was. Sometimes, giving up comfort and social status is necessary to find true freedom. Anna noticed the storm brewing around Ethan. The criticism, the social isolation, the alienation from his family. Everything was weighing on him. And in moments of silence, it was clear how much this struggle was hurting him. But Anna didn't back away. On the contrary, it was in the toughest days that she became even more present. She knew the price of rejection. She had felt it herself when she decided to distance herself from her wealthy family to live according to her principles. Now, she was determined to be Ethan's rock. Together they shared tears, fears, and uncertainties, but also grew stronger in every act of support. Anna showed Ethan, day after day, that true love isn't measured in wealth or status, but in loyalty, presence, and trust. As Ethan felt this unwavering support, he began to realize that Anna was not just his partner, but also the strength that kept him grounded in the world. Adversity, instead of pulling them apart, united them even more. Each challenge they faced together was another brick in the solid foundation they were building. Mutual support in difficult times creates a solid foundation for a relationship. Over time, Ethan felt something he had never experienced before: inner peace. The man who had spent years chasing multi-million-dollar contracts, luxurious events, and external approval could now simply breathe. There was no longer the pressure of maintaining appearances, no longer the weight of being someone he didn't want to be. With Anna by his side, she symbolized the life he had chosen. Simple, but real. No masks, no competition, no fear. When he looked at her, Ethan realized that happiness wasn't in the digits of his bank account or the admiring gazes he received at social events. Happiness was in Anna's spontaneous laughter, in walking side by side along the beach, in the comfortable silence of a late afternoon. It was in the truth he had so long ignored. This decision, which at first seemed like a sacrifice, had turned out to be a liberation. Ethan had not only found the love of his life, but had also found himself. And with it, he understood that the real value of existence wasn't in everything he had inherited, but in what he chose to be. True peace comes when we make choices aligned with our deepest values. By rejecting the status quo and choosing Anna, Ethan discovered that the greatest wealth isn't money or power, but authenticity and true love. He lost privileges, but gained the freedom to live by his own principles. And with Anna by his side, he found the peace and happiness he had always sought, but had never been able to find in the world of excess he once lived in. If this story touched you, leave a comment sharing what it means to live authentically. Like the video and subscribe to the channel to follow the final chapter of this emotional journey. Ethan and Anna, after facing challenges and criticism, finally found a path that truly belonged to them. The life they chose was not marked by luxury or grand parties, but by simple, authentic moments lived side by side. They decided to stay on the island, where everything had begun, and together they opened a small business. A cozy cafe by the sea, which became a gathering place for tourists and locals, was now the symbol of the new chapter in their lives. Ethan, who once spent his days in endless meetings and million-dollar contracts, now dedicated himself to serving customers, listening to stories, and experiencing the peace he had always sought. Anna, with her sweetness and dedication, took care of every detail of the place, transforming it into a space that reflected their essence: simplicity, warmth, and love. There were no more masks, no need to prove anything to anyone. They reinvented their story by choosing what truly mattered, living together, in harmony, appreciating the small joys of everyday life. True happiness isn't in the constant pursuit of more, but in appreciating what truly matters. The story of Ethan and Anna quickly became known among the locals of the island. Many remembered Ethan as the distant millionaire, inaccessible, accustomed to luxury. Now they saw a transformed man, someone who had discovered the importance of love and humility. Anna, on the other hand, never lost her essence. She had always believed that life was about choices, and that the greatest of them was to choose to be true to herself. By Ethan's side, she became the living proof that love can transcend any social difference, any barrier imposed by the world. Together, they inspired others. Tourists, upon learning their story, rethought their own lives, their priorities, and their choices. Many returned home not only with memories of the island's beauty, but also with the lesson that true love is the force that gives life meaning. Love is the force that transcends social differences and makes life more meaningful. Over time, Ethan and Anna married in a simple ceremony held on the very beach where their first meetings had taken place. Friends, neighbors, and resort guests attended. There was no ostentation, just sincere smiles, warm hugs, and the celebration of a love that had withstood all obstacles. Gradually, they became a reference on the island, not just for their story, but for their actions. Ethan, who had once lived in a world of excess, was now remembered for his generosity and humility. Anna, who had always cultivated simplicity, was now seen as the heart of the community, someone who inspired everyone with her courage and faith. The small cafe they ran became more than a business. It was a meeting place, a space for sharing and exchanging. People came in for coffee, but left with something much greater, the reminder that living authentically and generously has an impact far beyond ourselves. The impact of living authentically and generously goes far beyond our own lives. Ethan and Anna proved that true wealth isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we build with love, courage, and authenticity. By rejecting empty materialism and choosing a life based on simplicity and connection, they found true happiness and left a legacy of inspiration for all who crossed their paths. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment sharing what it means for you to truly start over. Like this video and subscribe to the channel to follow more stories of love, overcoming, and transformation. In the end, Ethan and Anna taught us that it's never too late to start over. True power isn't in money, but in character, and the true treasure is the love we choose to cultivate.